valued strength above all else, but even she had grown weary of endless battles and honor duels. Earth, with its supposed tranquility, was a break she was more than ready for. Translucent form gleamed with quiet anticipation. She was from a world of water and soft whispers, where emotions were ripples in a vast ocean. Earth's emotions would be more like waves crashing against rocks, and she was ready to feel their power. They descended through Earth's atmosphere like a comet, hidden behind a cloaking field that made them invisible to human eyes. The ship trembled softly as it entered the planet's gravitational pull, and the view outside shifted from the infinite darkness of space to the rich blue of Earth's skies. Clouds swirled beneath them, and soon they were soaring over a great expanse of ocean, its waves glimmering like liquid sapphire. "We'll blend in," Leora said, turning to the others. "Humans won't suspect a thing. Our bio-disguises are flawless." One by one, the alien girls activated their cloaking devices. Their otherworldly appearances shimmered and morphed, their crystalline, blue, muscular, and ethereal forms now replaced with human shapes and skin tones. They looked ordinary, though anyone who gazed too long might sense an otherworldly elegance that set them apart. "Where do we land?" Zyla asked, her excitement bubbling over. "Let's start somewhere populated," Leora said, adjusting their course. "We want to experience what this world has to offer. First steps in a strange world." Their ship landed deep in a forest, far from prying eyes. The cloaking field extended over it, making it appear as nothing more than a natural clearing, indistinguishable from the landscape around it. They stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the Earth night, the stars twinkling overhead, far more dimly than they were used to on their planets. "So, this is it," Nima whispered, her breath catching as she took in the smells of the forest, the soft rustling of leaves, the call of distant night creatures. She knelt and touched the ground, feeling the cool soil between her fingers. "It's alive in ways I didn't expect." Zyla twirled around, her arms outstretched. "I can feel the emotions of this place. Even nature here has its own pulse. It's raw and untamed, but so warm. I've never felt anything like this." Thalra crossed her arms, a rare smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Let's find out what this planet can offer. I want to see how strong these made their way to the right. The lights twinkling in the distance like a galaxy fallen to Earth. As they approached, the noises of human life grew louder: laughter, conversations, music. The girls entered the town and found themselves in the midst of a festival, humans celebrating under colorful banners strung between trees. Music echoed through the streets, and the warm glow of lanterns bathed everything in a soft, golden light. People danced, laughed, and embraced without a care in the world. The alien girls, disguised as humans, fit right in. "Look at them," Leora whispered, her voice filled with awe. "So full of life, emotion, they wear their hearts on their sleeves." Zyla's empathic senses were overwhelmed with the emotions flowing around her: joy, excitement, love, even small undercurrents of sadness and longing. "They're so open," she murmured. "They feel everything so deeply." Thalra snorted. "They don't seem like much of a threat. Maybe that's the problem. They're not warriors like us. They don't need to be," Nima said quietly. "They're connected in a different way." The night deepened, and as they mingled with the humans, the girls began to experience Earth in ways they hadn't expected. The simple pleasures of human life were intoxicating. Leora found herself drawn to the intellectual conversations of a group of scientists, their curiosity about the universe mirroring her own. Zyla slipped into a circle of artists, sharing stories of love and loss, reveling in the depth of their emotions. Thalra, ever the warrior, found herself drawn to a human soldier, exchanging tales of battle and strength, but finding in him a vulnerability that intrigued her. And Nima, shy and delicate, found a quiet spot by the river that ran through the town, where a young human man sat alone, sketching. He didn't notice her approach, too absorbed in his art, but when he did, he smiled. It was a simple gesture, but it held a warmth that Nima had never felt before. "Do you mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," he replied, his smile never fading. "It's a beautiful night, isn't it?" Nima nodded, feeling her heart stir in a way she hadn't expected. This was what she had come here for, to feel something new, something different. And in that moment, she realized that Earth had more to offer than just sights and sounds. It was full of connections, of raw, unfiltered emotions that were so unlike anything in the cold, logical world. As dawn approached, the girls reconvened at the edge of the town, their hearts and minds buzzing with the new experiences they had gathered. I didn't expect it to be like this, Leora admitted, her crystalline eyes shimmering behind her human guise. These humans, they're not what I thought. They're more complex. More emotional, Zyla added, a dreamy look in her eyes. They feel everything so deeply. It's beautiful. We're here to enjoy ourselves, remember Thalra said, though even her tough demeanor had softened. Nima said nothing, her thoughts still on the quiet artist by the river. She had felt something stir inside her, a connection, fleeting but real, and it was only the beginning. As they returned to their ship to rest, the alien girls realized that Earth was far more than just a vacation spot. It was a place that could change them in ways they hadn't expected. And though their journey had just begun, the seeds of something deeper, something far more meaningful, had already been planted. The following days on Earth unfolded like a delicate dream, each moment richer and more intoxicating than the last. For the 5 alien girls, their initial curiosity about the planet had blossomed into something far more complex. They had come seeking adventure, a break from their sterile, highly regulated lives, but now they found themselves drawn into the deep, mysterious web of human emotions. The planet, with all its unpredictability. Leora stood on a balcony overlooking the cityscape, the night air cool against her skin. In her human disguise, she looked unassuming, a young woman with dark, flowing hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. But beneath the surface, she was a creature of light and energy, her crystalline form always shimmering just beneath the veneer of her disguise. The bustling city below, with its countless glowing lights, reminded her of the distant stars of our own galaxy. This fascination with the cosmos had drawn her to it, and she had found herself returning to the site time and time again. At first, it had been a simple curiosity of her. He was a man who spent his life looking into the stars, just as she had spent hers traveling. But now, there was something deeper that spoke to her, something that resonated in the hollow places she hadn't known. His voice soft as they both gazed skyward. The more I study him, the questions I seem to have. Leora smiled, a small, secretive compliment. Perhaps it's not meant to give us answers. Perhaps it's meant to make us wonder. Nathan turned to her, his eyes glowing. You always speak like someone who knows more than she's letting. Leora's heart stilled, the crystalline core of her body pulsing faintly under her human skin. She had told him nothing of her true origins. How could she? The chasm between their worlds was too vast, too impossible to explain. And yet, here she was, drawn to this human man in a way that both exhilarated and terrified her. Maybe I do, she said, her voice light, though her eyes reflected the weight of the truth she carried. Maybe I've just spent too much time thinking about the stars. Nathan chuckled, unaware of the complexity behind her words. Well, if that's the case, I hope you'll keep thinking. There's something about you, Leora. Something different. She felt her heart stir again, an unfamiliar sensation for someone from a world where emotions were often suppressed in favor of intellect and reason. Nathan's gaze lingered on her, and for a brief moment she let herself imagine what it would be like to truly connect with him, to let the walls between them fall away. But that was a fantasy, wasn't it? Zyla, meanwhile, was losing herself in the riotous vibrancy of human emotions. She had always been the one to embrace feelings, to dive headfirst into whatever the universe had to offer, and Earth was proving to be more than she could have ever imagined. She had found herself drawn to Jesse, a musician whose soul seemed to hum with the same frequency as hers. His music was unlike anything she had ever heard on her own planet Raw, full of passion and unashamed of its intensity. He played guitar in a small, dimly lit club in the heart of the city, and Zyla had been returning to that club every night since the first time she heard him. That night she sat close to the stage, her blue skin disguised as a pale, human form, her empathic senses tuned to the emotions flowing from the crowd. But mostly she was tuned to him. His music was like a direct line into his heart, every note carrying his thoughts, his dreams, his fears. And as he played, she let herself sink into it, feeling every pulse of emotion like it was her own. When Jesse's set was over, he found her waiting for him backstage. He was sweaty, his long hair clinging to his forehead, but his smile was bright and easy. "You're back," he said, wiping his face with a towel. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again." Zyla grinned, her eyes sparkling in a way that made her seem otherworldly, even under her disguise. "I couldn't stay away. Your music, it's powerful." Jesse laughed, slinging his guitar over his shoulder. "I don't know about powerful, but I'm glad you like it. You've got this, I don't know, this way of looking at me like you can see something in the music that no one else can." Her grin softened into something more intimate, her heart opening in ways she hadn't expected. "Maybe I can," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "Music is emotion, and you put everything you are into it. It's beautiful." Jesse's smile faltered, and for a moment, the easy confidence he usually carried fell away. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, something shifted between them. There was a pull, magnetic and undeniable. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "There's something about you, too," he murmured. "Something I can't quite figure out." Zyla's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time she felt a wave of fear. Not of him, but of what she was feeling. Of how quickly she had let herself fall for this human, this fragile emotional being. But she couldn't stop it. She didn't want to stop it. Before she could think it through, she leaned in and kissed him. His lips were warm and soft, and as they connected, she felt his emotions flood through her surprise, desire, hope. It was intoxicating, and she lost herself in the rush of it all. In that moment, she didn't care about the consequences. She didn't care about the distance between their worlds. All that mattered was the heat between them, the way their hearts seemed to beat in sync. Thalra, on the other hand, was finding her own form of connection, though it was less about emotions and more about understanding. She had always been the warrior, the strongest, the one who could outfight anyone on her home planet. But here on Earth, her strength was not what defined her. It was her curiosity. She had met Adam, a soldier, during a training session at a local gym. It wasn't exactly the kind of place she had expected to spend her time on Earth, but when she saw him working out, something about his determination and focus intrigued her. Adam was different from the men she had known on her planet. He didn't wear his strength like a badge of honor. Instead, he was quiet, disciplined, and layered with vulnerability, a strange combination for someone like her, who had always associated strength with power. They had sparred together, and though Thalra held back after all, she could have easily overpowered him. She was impressed by his skill and his refusal to back down, even when it was clear she had the upper hand. "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" Adam had asked, wiping sweat from his brow after their first sparring session. Thalra smirked. "Let's just say I've had a lot of practice." Adam chuckled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or maybe respect. "You're not like anyone I've ever met. You fight like a soldier, but there's something else about you. Something different." Thalra shrugged, though inside she felt a strange warmth at his words. "Maybe I am different." They continued to meet at the gym, and over time their conversations grew deeper, moving beyond fighting techniques and training regimens. Thalra found herself drawn to Adam's quiet strength, the way he carried the weight of his past without letting it define him. He told her stories of his time in the military, the battles he had fought, and the losses he had suffered. Thalra, in turn, shared some of her own experiences, though she kept the details vague after all. It wasn't as if she could explain the wars of her home planet to a human. One night after an intense sparring session, they sat together on a bench outside the gym, the cool night air washing over them. Adam was quiet, his gaze distant as he stared up at the stars. "You ever wonder what else is out there?" he asked suddenly. Thalra glanced at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" Adam shrugged. "I don't know. Sometimes I think there's got to be more than just this. More than just the wars we fight, the things we do to survive. Maybe there's something bigger out there, something we can't even imagine." Thalra's chest tightened. "If only he knew," maybe there, she said softly. Adam turned to her, his expression serious. "You ever feel like you're not where you're supposed to be? Like you're different?" Thalra Leora swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Yeah, she whispered. I feel that way all the time. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken words hanging between them. And then, slowly, Adam reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, grounding, and Thalra felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had spent her life fighting, always proving her strength, always keeping her emotions in check. But here, with Adam, she didn't have to be strong. She could just be. Nima, delicate and shy, had found her own quiet corner of earth in the arms of Leo, the artist she had met by the river. They had fallen into a comfortable routine every evening. They would meet at the same spot, and Leo would sketch while Nima watched in silence, content to simply be near him. Leo was gentle, his movements careful and precise as he captured the world around him on paper. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful, filled with a quiet wisdom that Nima found comforting. One evening, as they sat together by the river, Leo handed Nima one of his sketches. It was of her, sitting by the water, her face serene and peaceful. She stared at it, her heart swelling with emotion. You captured me, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the flowing water. Leo smiled softly. I just drew what I saw. Nima looked up at him, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. No one's ever seen me like that before. Leo's smile faltered, and for a moment he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Maybe no one's ever taken the time to look. Nima's heart fluttered, and in that moment she knew that Earth had given her something she had never expected someone who truly saw her, not just as an alien or a visitor, but as herself. As the alien girls continued to explore Earth and their relationships with the humans they had met, they found themselves more deeply entwined with this world than they had ever anticipated. What had started as a vacation, a brief escape from their highly advanced but emotionally distant lives, was becoming something far more significant. They were falling in love. But as their connections deepened, so did the weight of the secrets they carried. Each of them knew that their time on Earth was limited, and that the truth of their origins could complicate everything. And yet, as they stood beneath the stars, each of them in the arms of someone who made them feel alive in ways they had never imagined, they couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was where they were meant to be. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting its soft golden glow on the quiet earth beneath. For days, the alien girls had basked in the warmth of the human connections they were forming, their hearts tangled with feelings they had never imagined possible. There was something about the simplicity and rawness of human emotion that left them intoxicated, captivated by the fragility and beauty of it all. But that morning, as the early light broke through the windows of their temporary human lives, the alien girls began to sense a strange change. It was subtle at first, a lingering fatigue that couldn't be shaken, an unusual warmth radiating from deep within their bodies. At first they thought it was nothing more than exhaustion from the whirlwind of earthly experiences they'd thrown themselves into. But as the hours passed, the signs became harder to ignore. Lyra woke up in a haze, her body heavy, her mind fogged with unfamiliar sensations. She rolled over in bed, her eyes focusing slowly on the unfamiliar ceiling of the small apartment she had rented in the city. For a moment she considered staying in bed, a luxury she rarely allowed herself back on her home planet, but something inside her urged her to move. A sharp, sudden pang twisted in her stomach, and Leora gasped, clutching her abdomen. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just fatigue. This wasn't something she could brush off as a consequence of her emotional entanglement with Nathan, or the newness of the Earth environment. No, this felt deeper, more primal. She stood on shaky legs, making her way to the small, circular device she had brought from her home world. It was her personal medical scanner, something her species rarely needed, but kept for emergencies. She activated it with a flick of her wrist, the glowing orb hovering above her as it scanned her body. Her breath caught in her throat as the device beeped softly and displayed the results. Impossible, she whispered, her crystalline eyes widening. She read the data again, her mind struggling to comprehend what it was telling her. It couldn't be true. It wasn't possible, not biologically, not genetically, not scientifically. She was pregnant. Zyla had been sitting in the park, basking in the emotions of the humans around her, when she felt the first wave of dizziness hit. She blinked, her empathic senses overwhelmed by the strange cocktail of sensations coursing through her. It wasn't coming from the humans around her, it was coming from within. She stood up too quickly, the world spinning around her. Clutching her head, she stumbled toward the nearest bench, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was wrong. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. Her body, designed to withstand the emotional onslaughts of entire civilizations, had never faltered like this before. Scylla pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. She closed her eyes and reached inward, attempting to sense what was happening inside her own body. What she found shocked her to her core. Her new life. A tiny, flickering spark of consciousness that wasn't her own. She opened her eyes, her entire world shifting beneath her feet. "It can't be," she whispered, her hand trembling as it rested on her stomach. I didn't think this was possible." Her mind raced back to Jesse, to the nights they had spent together, wrapped in each other's arms, lost in the raw emotion of their connection. She had thought it was just a fleeting romance, something beautiful but temporary. This was something else entirely. In a gym on the other side of town, Thalra was in the middle of her usual morning workout, pushing her body to its limits as she always did. Sweat glistened on her brow as she completed a grueling set of pull-ups, her muscles burning with exertion. But even as she powered through the familiar motions, there was a strange heaviness in her limbs, a nagging discomfort in her core that she couldn't shake. Thalra dropped down from the pull-up bar, rolling her shoulders to release the tension, but the discomfort only grew worse. It was a pressure, deep inside her, something that no amount of training could explain away. She gritted her teeth and headed for the locker room, where she could be alone. Once inside, Thalra leaned against the cool tile wall, her breathing labored. She placed a hand on her stomach, instinctively trying to locate the source of the pain. Her warrior instincts told her something was wrong, very wrong. She activated her personal medical device, hidden in her locker, and ran a diagnostic scan. The results appeared before her eyes, and for the first time in her life, Thalra felt true fear. The scan confirmed it. She, the strongest warrior of her species, was pregnant. And not just with any child, this was a human hybrid. Her mind reeled. How could this happen? Her species was known for their genetic perfection, their isolation from other life forms. The idea that a human could impregnate her was not only biologically improbable, but also a challenge to everything her society believed. She clenched her fists, her heart racing. She had to tell the others. This was more than just a personal issue, this had galactic consequences. At the riverbank, where she had spent so many peaceful evenings, Nima sat in silence, her violet eyes fixed on the gentle flow of the water. But today, her usual tranquility was gone, replaced by a growing unease in her body. She had felt it for days now, a slow, steady shift inside her, like a tide turning against the current. Leo had noticed it too. He had asked her, gently, if she was feeling all right. But how could she explain it to him? How could she tell him that her body, so delicate and alien, was betraying her in ways she didn't understand? She had retreated to the river alone that morning, hoping the water would soothe her, but it had only intensified the strange sensations. She placed a hand on her stomach, her fingers trembling as she felt the faint stirrings of something new, something alive. Nima closed her eyes, reaching deep inside her being, searching for answers. And there, beneath the surface of her consciousness, she felt it a heartbeat. Not hers. Not human. But not fully alien either. Tears welled in her eyes as the realization hit her. She was carrying Leo's child. A child that shouldn't even be possible. By the time Kaivra felt the strange shifts in her body, the others had already begun to piece together what was happening. Unlike the others, Kaivra was more attuned to her body's rhythms. Her species had developed such finely tuned control over their physiology that any deviation was immediately noticeable. She had felt the changes almost as soon as they began, and she had run a diagnostic on herself before the thought even crossed her mind to do so. The results were irrefutable. She too was pregnant, and she too carried a human-alien hybrid. Kaivra stood in front of the full-length mirror in the apartment she had rented, her expression impassive as she stared at her reflection. She touched her stomach, though there was no visible sign of the life growing inside her yet. Her logical mind whirred, trying to process the data. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her species was biologically incompatible with humans, at least. That's what all of the galactic research had indicated. And yet, here she was, carrying the undeniable proof that such a union was possible. She took a deep breath and activated her communicator. It was time to gather the others. The 5 alien girls met in the same forest clearing where their ship was hidden, their faces etched with shock and uncertainty. The air was thick with tension as they stood in a circle, each one grappling with the reality of what was happening to them. "This isn't possible," Leora said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Our species aren't compatible with humans. This shouldn't be happening." "Tell that to my body," Zyla muttered, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I felt it. There's life inside me. A child. A hybrid." Thalra's face was a mask of barely contained fury, her fists clenched at her sides. "This complicates everything. If our people find out about this, they'll see it as a threat." Kyber finished, her voice as calm and measured as ever. "Our societies are not ready for this. We're not ready for this." Nima, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice soft and steady. "Maybe it's not a threat. Maybe. This is something new, something that could change everything." The others turned to look at her, and for a moment there was silence. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. "They won't see it that way," Thalra said, shaking her head. "Our societies are built on rules, on maintaining the purity of our species. If they find out we had children with humans," Leora finished, her voice heavy with the gravity of the situation. The word hung between them, unspoken yet undeniable. "Children. Half human, half alien children." "What do we do?" Zyla asked, her usually carefree demeanor replaced with fear and uncertainty. "We can't stay here forever. We'll have to go back. And when we do, they'll know," Kivra said quietly. "And they won't just be curious, they'll be afraid. Afraid of what these children mean for the future of the galaxy." Lyra ran a hand through her hair, her mind racing. "This isn't just about us anymore. This is about them, our children. They could be the key to something bigger than we ever imagined. But how do we protect them? How do we keep them safe?" The group fell into a heavy silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The future was no longer the carefree adventure they had set out for. It was something much more complicated, something with far-reaching consequences that they couldn't yet fully comprehend. Finally, Thalra broke the silence. "We need to tell the humans, the ones we are connected with. They deserve to know." The others nodded, though the idea of revealing the truth to the men they had grown close to was daunting. How would they react? Would they see this as a miracle or as a curse? "I'll tell Nathan tonight," Lyra said, her voice steady, though her heart raced with thought. "He deserves to know the truth." "I'll tell Jesse," Zyla added, though her usual bravado was tempered by fear. "I can't hide this from him." Thalra, Nima, and Kybra all nodded, their resolve firm, despite the uncertainty that loomed over them. They had come to Earth for a vacation, a break from the sterile confines of their technologically advanced worlds, but now they were facing something far greater in future that was as uncertain as it was full of potential. And as they stood together in the quiet forest, each of them carrying the weight of the new lives growing inside them, they knew one thing for certain: their time on Earth had changed everything. The stars stretched out in endless, glittering silence as the ship cut through the vacuum of space, leaving Earth behind like a distant, fading memory. The alien girls sat in the quiet hum of their ship's command chamber, the weight of their decision pressing down on them like the vastness of space itself. Their brief, carefree vacation had unraveled into something much more profound, something irreversible. They had left Earth, not just with memories, but with life growing inside them, half human, half alien children. And now they were returning home, each to fate. A marvel of alien technology, but none of its advanced systems could prepare them for the storms awaiting them on their respective home planets. The quiet tension in the air was palpable, the conversations that should have been happening hanging unspoken between them. Each woman sat with her own thoughts, lost in the enormity of what lay ahead. Lyra broke the silence first, her voice soft but filled with determination. "We knew this was coming. We prepared for it as much as we can." "But there's no real way to prepare for this," Thalra replied, her arms crossed over her chest. Her usual warrior confidence was tinged with uncertainty. "Not for something like this." Zyla leaned back in her seat, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the surface of the console. "I wonder what Jesse would say if he could see us now." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. He'd probably laugh and call this the weirdest road trip ever. Nima, always the quiet one, spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. I miss Leo already. I didn't even have the chance to say goodbye properly. Her violet eyes shimmered with unshed tears. How can I explain all of this to my people when I don't fully understand it myself? Kyvra, seated at the helm, kept her gaze fixed on the star-filled view ahead. We've done what we had to. Our worlds need to know the truth, and the galaxy is not prepared for hybrids, but that doesn't mean we should hide them. Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Each of the girls carried within them the beginnings of a new chapter for the galaxy, whether their people were ready for it or not. Leora's homecoming, the world of crystalline knowledge. Leora's home planet, Vyra, was a gleaming world of crystalline cities, floating towers, and luminous energy fields that stretched across the landscape like a web of light. The Varethi prided themselves on their intellect, on their mastery of science and logic. Emotion was considered an anomaly, a distraction from the pursuit of knowledge. Leora, with her sharp mind and dedication to scientific discovery, had always fit perfectly into this world. But now, returning home carrying a child born of emotion, of passion, she felt like an outsider in her own land. The moment she stepped off the ship, her crystalline body shimmering in the bright light of Vyra's twin suns, she was met by the High Council, a group of elder Varethi, whose very presence commanded respect. Their eyes, facets of gleaming crystal like her own, reflected the gravity of the situation. Leora, one of the elders, spoke, his voice resonating with the calm, measured tone of someone who had lived for centuries. You've returned from your expedition, but we sense that you are not the same as when you left. Leora took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. No, I'm not. I have come back with a discovery of a different kind. One that challenges everything we thought we knew about our biology. The council exchanged glances, their faceted eyes narrowing. Explain, another elder commanded. And so Leora told them everything about Earth, about Nathan, and about the child growing inside her. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of their judgment, their disbelief. The Varethi prided themselves on their knowledge of the universe, and to hear that something so unprecedented had occurred, something that defied all logic and understanding, was not something they could easily accept. You have compromised our genetic purity, one of the elders said, their voice cold and accusing. This child is an anomaly, a distraction from the path of intellect and advancement. It will disrupt the balance of our society. Leora's heart pounded, but she stood tall, her crystalline form glowing with a defiant light. This child is not a distraction. It is a bridge between two worlds, possibly never the same. Isn't that what we are supposed to do? Explore the unknown and embrace new discoveries. The council was silent for a long moment, their faceted eyes unreadable. Finally, the head elder spoke. We will consider your words, Leora. But know this child threatens the integrity of our society. We will act accordingly. Leora nodded, her heart heavy. She had expected resistance, hearing the cold, equal tone in which they spoke of her child had deeper than she imagined. She left the council chambers. Silas' home planet, Euros, was a place of emotion and thought. Every feeling was shared for the age. The erosion valued emotional depth above all else. But even in a society where feelings were celebrated, there were limits to what was considered acceptable. As Silas' ship descended onto the planet, she could feel the collective emotions of the people washing over her like a tidal wave. There was curiosity, excitement at her return, but also a growing undercurrent of apprehension. They had sensed something different about her the moment she entered their emotional sphere, and now they waited to hear what it was. Silas stepped onto the soft, moss-covered ground of her home planet, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and emotions. But this was different. She wasn't sure how her people would react to the news that she was carrying a child born below, not just from an alien species, but from a human. The elders of Eros, known as the Hard Circle, greeted her in the central square, their empathic presences wrapping around her like a warm embrace. But beneath the warmth, Sila could feel the tremors of uncertainty. Culminating with 1,000 emotions at once, you have returned with something heavy. Sila nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I have. I come back with more than just memories of the far-off world. I come back with life. The collective gasp of the heart circle echoed through the empathic web, and Zyla felt the shock ripple through her people like an emotional earthquake. Child, one of the elders whispered, but not in the Rosen child in a sense. Something else. Something foreign. Zyla took a deep breath, steady. For a long moment, there was silence. The emotions of the people shifted and swirled around her, a storm of confusion, fear, and unexpectedly curiosity. The elder said, her voice trembling with emotion, to bring a child into the world that is not holy. Waited for centuries. Sila's heart ached at their words, but she refused to back down. This child is a part of me, and I am a part of this world. It will learn our ways, feel our emotions, just as I have. But it will also bring something new, something that could enrich our connection, not weaken it. The elder's eyes softened, and for the first time, Sila felt a glimmer of hope. We will not cast you or your child out, Sila, but we must tread carefully. The empathic web is fragile, and we must ensure that this new life does not unravel it. Sila nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She knew this was just the beginning, but at least she wasn't facing it alone. Thalra's returned the warrior world of Zorith. Thalra's home planet, Zorith, was a world of harsh landscapes and even harsher people. Strength was the only currency that mattered, and warriors were revered above all else. To show weakness was to invite death, and any deviation from the path of strength was seen as betrayal. As Thalra's ship touched down on the jagged cliffs of her homeworld, she felt a familiar sense of dread settle in her chest. She had always been the strongest, the most disciplined warrior among her people. But now, she was returning not just as a warrior, but as a mother-to-be, and not just any mother, but the mother of a human-alien hybrid. Her people greeted her with a cold, silent respect as she stepped onto the stone platform that overlooked the vast, windswept plains. The Zorithians were not a people of words, they valued action above all else. But Thalra could feel the weight of their judgment in the air. General Duran, leader of the warrior caste, stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning her from head to toe. Thalra, daughter of Zorith, you have returned, but you carry more than just the honor of battle. Thalra clenched her fists, her heart pounding. I carry a child that is part of me and part human. A murmur rippled through the assembled warriors, their expressions unreadable. General Duran's eyes narrowed, his voice low and dangerous. You have tainted your bloodline with the weakness of another species. Thalra met his gaze, unflinching. This child is not weak. It will be strong, stronger than any Zorithian, because it will carry. Perhaps her curiosity. We will see. If this child is to be born as Zorith, it will face the same trials as anyone else. If it survives, it will learn to place in us. If it does not, it will be forgotten. Thalra nodded, heart heavy with resolute. She knew the risks. They were afraid of her child. But she would not let fear rule her. Her child would survive. She would make sure of it. Nima's home planet, Thalassa, was a world of oceans, its cities submerged beneath the tranquil blue waters. Her people lived in harmony with the sea, their lives guided by the ebb and flow of the tides. They were a peaceful, contemplative species, and Nima had always found comfort in the serenity of her world. But now she was returning with a secret that threatened to shatter that peace. As her ship descended into the underwater city of Clarina, Nima felt a deep sense of unease. Her people were not ones to judge harshly, but they valued the purity of their connection to the sea, to the natural world. How would they react to the news that she was carrying a child that was part human, a child born from a world so far removed from the gentle currents of Thalassa? Her mother, Elira, met her at the entrance to their family's dwelling, her soft violet eyes filled with concern. Nima, you have been gone for so long. I felt your absence like a shadow over the water. Nima swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. I'm sorry, Mother, I brought something back with me. Something that will change everything. Elira's eyes widened, her gaze dropping to Nima's stomach. A child? But deep breath, her voice trembling. Her father is human, from a distant planet called Earth. This child is a part of me, but also a part of him. For a long moment, her mother said nothing. The soft hum of the ocean currents filled the silence between them, and Nima's heart raced. Finally, Elira reached out and placed a gentle hand on Nima's stomach. The sea does not judge, she said softly. It flows, it adapts, it embraces all life within it. This child is a part of you, and as such, it is a part of Thalassa. Tears filled Nima's eyes as she embraced her mother, relief flooding through her. But even as she felt the warmth of acceptance, she knew that not all of her people would be so understanding. The tides were shifting, and she would have to navigate the changing currents carefully. Kyvra's return to the logical world of Metronus. Kyvra's home planet, Metronus, was a world governed by logic and order. Her people were known for their cold, calculated approach to life, their emotions carefully controlled, and their society structured around efficiency and intellect. There was no room for unpredictability, no tolerance for deviation from the logical path. As Kyvra's ship descended onto the smooth, metallic surface of her home city, she felt the familiar calm of her logical mind taking over. But beneath that calm, there was a flicker of something else, something she had never felt before. Fear? Anxiety? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that the child growing inside her was a disruption, an anomaly that her people would not easily accept. She was met by the Council of Thought, the ruling body of Metronus, their faces expressionless as they awaited her explanation. Kyvra, daughter of logic, you have returned with knowledge, one of the council members said, his voice as measured and emotionless as ever. But we sense an irregularity in your presence. Explain. Kyvra stood tall, her voice steady. I have returned with more than knowledge. I have returned with a child that is part of me and part human. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. This is an illogical development, the lead council member said. Our species is not compatible with humans. How is this possible? Kyvra took a deep breath. I don't know, but it has happened. And this child is proof that our understanding of genetic compatibility is flawed. The council was silent for a long moment, their minds processing the information. Finally, the lead council member spoke again. This child is a deviation from the logical path. It cannot be allowed to disrupt the order of our society. Kyvra's heart clenched, but she kept her voice calm. This child is not a disruption. It is an opportunity to expand our understanding, to evolve beyond the limits of our current knowledge. The council was silent again, their decision hanging in the balance. Finally, the lead council member nodded. We will observe. But know this, Kyvra, if this child poses a threat to the logical order, it will be dealt with accordingly. Kyvra nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew the risks, but she also knew that this child was worth fighting for. As the days passed, each of the alien girls settled back into their respective worlds, but nothing felt the same. Their time on Earth had changed them, and now they were mothers-to-be, carrying children that represented the future of the galaxy, children that would either be the key to a new era of unity and understanding, or the spark that ignited conflict and division. Each of them faced their own challenges, Leora with the cold logic of the Lirithi, Xyla with the emotional storm of the Erosians, Aura with the brutal strength of the Zorithians, Nima with the gentle flow of the Thalassians, and Kyvra with the rigid logic of the Metronus. But through it all, they held on to the hope that their children, these hybrids of two worlds, would find a place in the galaxy. They had left Earth behind, but the connection they had forged there, the love they had found, the children they now carried would shape the future in ways they could not yet imagine.
en snelle bezorging op Amazon.nl. Hilarisch entertainment.
Double booked your weddings. What?
Amazon Prime heeft het voor $4,99 per maand.
The stars never looked so unforgiving. Michael Harrington had always loved space, the silence of it. The endless expanse that seemed to go on forever with no beginning and no end. It was beautiful in a way that nothing on Earth could ever be. But it was also harsh. A cold wilderness with no sympathy for the weak or the unprepared. And now, as his ship spiraled out of control through the atmosphere of an uncharted planet, Michael was experiencing the cold indifference firsthand. The warning lights on the control panel flashed violently, a cacophony of alarms filling the cockpit. His breathing was shallow, heart racing as his hands moved frantically over the controls, trying to stabilize the ship's descent. Sweat poured down his forehead, blurring his vision as the ship's hull shuddered under the force of entry. The heat outside was building, friction eating away at the protective layers of the ship, but Michael barely had time to think about it. Come on, he muttered through gritted teeth, fingers trembling as he fought the unyielding force of gravity. The atmosphere was thicker than expected, pulling him down faster than he had anticipated. He hadn't meant to crash, it had been a routine mission. His role as an explorer for the Intergalactic Research Division took him to unknown worlds, mapping planets for potential resources or habitability. This was just supposed to be another dot on the galactic map. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. A malfunction in the ship's navigation system had thrown him off course, and by the time he realized it, he had already been caught in the planet's gravity well. All attempts to re-engage the thrusters had failed. He was going down, whether he liked it or not. The ground below was fast approaching. Jagged mountains and forests that stretched in miles. There was no choice but to brace for impact. Gripping the harnesses that secured him to the pilot's seat, Michael squeezed his eyes shut as the ship careened toward the surface. A deafening crash. Metal groaned and twisted. The force of the impact slammed him against his seat, knocking the wind from his lungs. Pain shot through his body as the ship skidded along the ground, tearing through the alien landscape. Sparks flew, smoke filled the cabin, and for a moment everything went black. Michael awoke to silence, heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the soft hiss of the ship's dying system. His head throbbed, and every muscle of his body screamed protest as he shivered in the sea. Blinking through the haze, he found the control panel dark, wires dangling from the ceiling, and his bright screen now packed with screen. With a groan, he fumbled with the harness and managed to release himself from the seat, tumbling awkwardly to the floor. His limbs felt like lead, and it took several moments before he could force himself to stand. He limped toward the shattered viewport and peered outside. The landscape was unlike anything he had ever seen. The sky was an eerie shade of violet, twin suns hanging low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the jagged rocky terrain. Strange bioluminescent plants dotted the area, glowing faintly in the dim light. In the distance, towering trees with silver leaves swayed in the wind, their branches reaching upward like skeletal fingers. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The planet was beautiful in a way, but also dangerous. His eyes darted around, assessing his surroundings. The ship's hull had taken significant damage. There was no way it would fly again. His chances of signaling for help were slim. His emergency beacon was operational, but there was no guarantee that anyone would pick it up out here in the middle of nowhere. He was alone, stranded. Taking a deep breath, Michael forced himself into survival mode. He couldn't afford to panic. He grabbed the emergency pack from the storage compartment, which held limited food rations, water, a basic first aid kit, and a few survival tools. Not nearly enough for the long haul, but it would have to be done. As he exited the wreckage of his ship, the crisp air of the planet hit him, cool but breathable. At least he didn't need a suit. That was something. He surveyed the land again, calculating his next steps. He needed to find shelter, water somewhere safe to regroup and figure out his next move. But before he could take more than a few steps, something caught his eye. The trail of blood. Alien blood. It glistened on the ground, a strange, silvery liquid, leading away from the crash site. His gut tightened. He wasn't alone. Instinct told him to be cautious, but curiosity got the better of him. He followed the trail, keeping his hand near the plasma pistol strapped to his side. The path wound through the rocky terrain, past the glowing plants, until it led him to a small, shallow cave hidden between two jagged cliffs. Inside, he found the source of the blood. Lying against the cave wall was a figure, an alien woman, her green skin pale and iridescent, her body covered in strange, jagged cuts. She was breathing, but just barely, her chest rising and falling in labored motions. Her eyes were closed, her face contorted in pain. She looked humanoid in shape, but utterly foreign. Her long, dark hair fanned out beneath her, and her limbs were slender, almost delicate, though there was a raw strength in her posture even in her fleeting state. Michael froze. He had never seen anything like her. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but she was also clearly in danger. His training as an explorer had prepared him for a lot of things, but nothing like this. Still, there was no time to hesitate. He had to act. Without thinking, Michael knelt beside her, gently pressing his fingers to her neck to check her pulse. It was weak but steady. She was alive, but she wouldn't be for long if he didn't do something. He quickly rummaged through his pack, pulling out the first aid kit. He wasn't sure how compatible human medicine would be with her physiology. He didn't have a choice. Carefully, he cleaned her wounds, Fine, the bio yelled to stop the bleeding. She stirred slightly under his touch, but didn't wait. Her skin was warm, warmer than Phoenix, and it glowed faintly into the dim light of the cave. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice how fragile she seemed, so different from the rugged explorers and soldiers he was used to seeing. And yet, there was something powerful about her, something that suggested she was no ordinary alien. Once he finished tending to her injuries, Michael leaned back on his heels and took a deep breath. He had done what he could. Now it was up to her body to heal, but he couldn't leave her here. She was vulnerable, exposed to the elements and possibly other dangers. He sat beside her, watching her for any sign of movement, unsure of what to do next. Hours passed, planet's twin suns dipping below the horizon, casting the landscape into a deep, unnatural twilight. The glow from the plants intensified, bathing the cave in a soft, ethereal light. Michael's exhaustion began to catch up with him, but he refused to sleep. Not yet. Not yet. Suddenly, the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and Michael found himself staring into them large, dark eyes that seemed full of entire galaxies within them. For a moment, they locked gazes, and in that instant, something passed between them. It wasn't words, but it was communication all the same. She was aware of him, of what he had done. She tried to speak, her voice a soft, musical sound. The words were foreign, impossible to understand. Michael shook his head slightly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I don't understand you," he said softly, knowing she wouldn't understand him either. The alien woman blinked slowly, her gaze fixed on him. Then, with great effort, she lifted a hand and touched her chest. "Mira," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael frowned, but then realization dawned. "Mira," he repeated, pointing to her name. "Good night." She nodded weakly, her eyes never leaving his face. He smiled, though it felt strange in this surreal situation. "Michael," he said, pointing to himself. "My name is Michael." For a moment, there was only silence between them, but it wasn't the kind of silence that needed to be filled. It was the quiet understanding of two beings who, despite their differences, had found themselves bound by circumstances beyond their control. Stranded, alone, and now, together. The following days were a blur of survival and learning. Mira recovered slowly, but her strength was returning, thanks in part to Michael's efforts to care for her. They couldn't speak to each other in any meaningful way, but they didn't need to. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and the shared struggle to stay alive on this strange planet. Michael learned that Mira was resourceful, guiding him to edible plants and clean water sources. She had an innate understanding of the planet, as if she had been here before, or had some kind of connection to it. She moved with a grace and purpose that fascinated him, even in her weakened state. One day, as they sat by a small fire near the cave, Myra reached for Michael's hand, her fingers warm against his skin. He looked at her, surprised by the sudden gesture. She spoke a few words in her alien tongue, and though he couldn't understand her, he knew what she meant. It was a thank you, an expression of gratitude for saving her life. Michael nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "You're welcome," he whispered, though he knew she wouldn't understand the words. But it didn't matter. They understood each other in the ways that truly counted. The night sky was clear that evening, and Michael found himself staring up at the stars, wondering what the future held for him. He had been stranded before he knew the protocol, the steps he needed to take to signal for help. But now, as he looked over at Mira, who was resting peacefully beside him, he wasn't sure he wanted to leave so quickly. Something had shifted in him, something he hadn't expected. He didn't just see Mira as a survivor, or even as an alien. She was more than that. She was a mystery, a connection to something larger, something he had yet to understand. And for the first time in his life, Michael felt that maybe the stars weren't so unforgiving after all. Michael sat by the flickering campfire, the embers casting warm, dancing shadows on the cavern walls. Outside, the two suns had set, leaving the alien world bathed in twilight. The bioluminescent plants surrounding the cave glowed faintly, their light casting an otherworldly aura over the landscape. Mira sat nearby, green skin shimmering faintly in the soft light, her eyes distant as she gazed at the stars through the narrow opening of the cave. She was healing, Michael noted. Her movements were smoother, less labored. The cuts on her arms and legs, once deep and raw, were now thin scars, fading slowly against her iridescent skin. Yet there was something different about her tonight, something he couldn't quite place. Michael had gotten used to her silence, to the quiet moments they shared without the need for words. Their communication had improved from rudimentary exchanges of simple ideas, small gestures that bridged the gap between their languages. But tonight, there was a weight in the air, a tension that Michael could feel even though neither of them had spoken for hours. He leaned back on his hands, glancing over at her. Mira sat cross-legged on the cool stone floor, her gaze fixed on the night sky. Her expression was serene, but her eyes, there was something in them, something contemplative, almost sad. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly, knowing she wouldn't fully understand, but hoping his tone would convey the question. Mira didn't look at him right away. She remained still, her fingers tracing delicate patterns in the dirt beside her. When she finally turned to him, her eyes were soft but distant, as if she were thinking about something far beyond the cave, beyond this planet. "Michael," she said, her voice quiet but clear, the sound of his name on her lips still foreign but familiar. She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "You? Save me?" Michael smiled, though the weight in her voice made it feel bittersweet. "I had to," he replied gently. I couldn't just leave you there. She shook her head slowly, her dark hair shimmering in the dim light. No, you're brave, strong. He blinked, caught off guard by her words. Mira had never spoken like this before, never tried to express something so deep. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded, unsure of what else to say. But Mira wasn't finished. She lowered her eyes, her hands resting in her lap now, fingers curling into her palms. You, different, she continued, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. Kind. No fear. Michael swallowed, the air suddenly feeling heavier between them. He wasn't sure where this was going, but something told him it was something about her tone, about the way she looked at him. It made him feel like she was trying to tell him something. I'm not that different, he replied quietly, his eyes searching hers. I just did what anyone would do. Mira's lips curved into a small, sad smile. No, she whispered, shaking her head. Not anything. She fell silent again, her gaze drifting back to the stars. Michael followed her eyes, wondering what she was thinking about when she saw up there in the vast, dark sky the sky that stretched endlessly above them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the sound of the alien night, the distant calls of strange creatures, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind filled the space between them. Michael felt a strange tightness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, but something else. Something closer. The days had fallen into a rhythm since Michael had rescued Mira. They foraged for food together, explored the nearby terrain, and worked on improving their communication. Slowly, a bond had formed, one that felt deeper than just survival. But Mira had been changing, and Michael could see it in the small, subtle way she acted around him. Her touch lingered just a little longer when their hands brushed, her eyes softened whenever they met his. She was different now. Not just physically recovering, but emotionally, as if something inside her had shifted. Mira, however, was keeping a secret. Deep in the night, when Michael was asleep, she would sit alone by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her mind heavy with thoughts of a woman in her culture. The act of saving a life was not something to be taken lightly. It was sacred. It was binding. And it demanded a response. To Sir Lawrence, the highest form of gratitude, the ultimate gesture of respect and honor, was to give a gift, not a material object, but something much more profound, something that transcended the physical. It was a tradition that dated back thousands of years, one that carried deep spiritual and cultural significance. Mira's heart ached as she thought about it. She had never imagined being in this position, never thought she would owe such a gift to anyone, let alone an alien human so far from her own. And yet, Michael had saved her. His bravery, his kindness had earned her respect in a way no one else had. He had shown her a kind of selflessness she had never known, risking his life to help a stranger from another. And now, according to her people's traditions, she owed him the greatest gift she could offer, the gift of a child. The thought made her stomach twist with nerves, though she showed none of it on her face. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until she was certain he would understand, that he would accept what it meant. To Sir Lawrence, this was the ultimate act of gratitude, a bond that tied two beings together for eternity. But to humans, she wasn't sure. Mira glanced over at Michael, who was still sitting by the fire, his eyes distant as he stared into the flames. She wondered if he could ever comprehend the depth of her gesture, the weight of what she wanted to offer him. But she couldn't delay much longer. The time was approaching. Over the next few days, Mira's behavior became more purposeful and more deliberate. She started teaching Michael more about the planet, showing him where to find water sources, how to recognize the signs of dangerous wildlife, and what plants were safe to eat. It was as if she was preparing him for something, though Michael couldn't quite. Michael, she began, her voice low and serious. You, Earth. He blinked, surprised by the question. Yet he answered slowly, trying to gauge where this was going. I'm from... Mira nodded, her expression thoughtful. Earth? Far. Michael sighed, leaning back on his hands. Very far. I don't even know how far. I lost track when I crashed here. Mira's gaze dropped, and for a moment she was quiet again. Then she looked up at him, her eyes shining with something he couldn't quite read. You! Go back. The question caught him off guard. He hadn't really thought about it. His emergency beacon was still active, but he wasn't sure if anyone had received it, or if anyone ever would. The chances of being rescued felt slim. But still, the idea of going home, of leaving this strange planet behind, hadn't crossed his mind in days. I don't know, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I guess I want to go back, but I don't know if I can. Not yet, anyway. Mira seemed to absorb his words carefully. Her eyes softened again at distant look. You. Save me, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. I no forget. No forget. Michael's heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. He had heard her thank him before, but this time it felt different. There was an intensity to his words, a gravity that made his chest ache. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, Myra stood up abruptly. Michael, she said, pointing toward the cave entrance. Look. Look for what Michael asked, confused. She didn't answer, just gave him a small, mysterious smile before disappearing into the night. Mira wandered through the alien forest, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had to find the right moment to offer Michael the gift, to explain what it meant in her culture, in her heart. But the fear gnawed at her. What if he didn't understand? What if he rejected it? For people had always believed that the bond created by saving a life was sacred, that it transcended language, species, even time. But humans were different. Michael was different. He had shown her kindness, yes, but would he accept the depth of her gratitude? Would he understand that to her, giving him a child wasn't just about biology, it was about forging a connection, about honor, respect, and love. She had seen the way he looked at her, sometimes the quiet admiration in his eyes, the way his gaze softened when she spoke. She had felt the warmth in his touch, the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. But did he feel it too? Did he feel what she felt? Mira's fingers brushed against her abdomen, her heart racing with the knowledge that soon, very soon, she would have to make her decision clear. She had already started the process, her body preparing for what would come. It was a part of her biology, an instinct passed down through generations of Solorans. The gift of life, the child, would be the ultimate symbol of their bond. But for now, she kept it hidden. The days passed in a quiet rhythm on the new planet, a pattern of survival and discovery. Michael and Mira had developed an unspoken routine. Together, they foraged, explored, and tended to their small camp, growing more attuned to each other with each passing moment. The alien planet had transformed from a hostile, unknown wilderness into something more familiar, almost like a home. And yet, something lingered between them, a tension that neither had dared to address. Michael could feel it. He could sense a change in Mira, subtle but undeniable. Her presence had shifted. She had grown quieter, more thoughtful, as if something weighed on her. Her moments of deep contemplation had become more frequent. And when their eyes met, there was a new intensity in her gaze, something more profound, more deliberate. He tried not to overthink it, but it gnawed at him in the quiet hours of the night when he lay awake, staring at the alien sky. One evening, after a long day of exploring the nearby forest, they returned to their cave just as the twin suns began to dip below the horizon. The violet sky darkened, casting deep shadows over the landscape. The glow of the bioluminescent plants intensified, filling the cave with their soft and otherworldly light. Michael sat by the fire, staring into the flames as he absentmindedly looked at the embers with a stick. The warmth of the fire felt comforting after the cool of the night had begun to settle in. Mira sat across from him, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped around him. She had been silent for most of the evening. Michael was used to her quiet nature. Tonight it felt different. He could feel her gaze on her and sense the weight of something unsaid. Mira, he said softly, not looking up from the fire. There was no immediate response, but he could feel her shifting. He could hear the faint rustle of her movements. When he finally glanced up, he found her watching him with those large, dark eyes. The mind seemed to hold galaxies within them, eyes that had grown familiar to him and had grown. She took a deep breath, her expression serious, as if she had made a decision. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but steady, and like old talk. Michael set the stick down and sat up straighter, sensing the gravity of her words. Of course he replied, his brow furrowing slightly in concern. What's on your mind? For a moment, Myra said nothing. She glanced away, her gaze drifting toward the cave entrance where the stars had begun to appear in the deepening sky. The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the subtle shimmer of her iridescent skin. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost hesitant. You saved me, she began, her words slow as if she were carefully choosing each one. I never forget. Michael nodded, though he felt a strange tightness in his chest. They had spoken about this before, about how he had found her injured and helped her. But there was something different about the way she was speaking now, something heavier. I'm glad I could help, he said gently, trying to meet her eyes. But you don't owe me anything, Mira. You know that, right? Mira's gaze flicked back to him, and for a moment, her expression softened. But then she shook her head, her dark hair catching the light as it swayed gently around her shoulders. No, she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. More than that, Michael's heart skipped a beat. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, trying to understand what she was trying to tell him. What do you mean, he asked carefully, sensing that whatever she was about to say was important, deeply important. Mira took another breath, her hands tightening around her knees. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, her lips parting and closing again, as though the words were difficult to say. Finally, she looked at him, and in her eyes, Michael saw something he had never seen before: vulnerability. In my world, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, to save life, sacred. Michael blinked, surprised by her words. He had never heard her speak about her culture in such a personal way before. She had mentioned bits and pieces of Sonoran customs during their time together, but never in such depth. Sacred, he repeated, trying to keep his voice gentle, encouraging her to continue. Mira nodded, her gaze not leaving his. Yes, when someone saves life, they are bound forever. She paused, her fingers tightening slightly as if bracing herself for his reaction. We give him. We give him life. Michael's brow furrowed. He wasn't sure he understood what she meant. A gift of life, he echoed, his confusion clear. Mira's eyes softened, and she let out a slow breath. Yes, she whispered. The greatest gift we can give is child. The world's seemed to stop for a moment. Michael stared at her, his mind racing as he processed what she had just said. A child. Did she mean? You want to give me a child? He asked slowly, his voice barely audible. Mira nodded, her expression serious, but there was a gentleness in her eyes that told him this was not just a casual decision. This was something deeply important to her, something rooted in her culture and her very being. Michael's heart raced, his mind spinning. The child. He had never expected this, had never even imagined such a possibility. The implications were overwhelming. He was human. She was an alien. The differences between them were vast, biological, cultural, everything. And yet, here she was, offering him the most profound gift her people could give. Mira, he began, his voice trailing off as he struggled to find the right words. I don't know what to say. She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting slightly in her lap. I know it is strange, she said softly. But it is our way. It is how we honor those who save us. I want to honor you, Michael. You have given me so much. Your kindness, your bravery. Michael felt a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't done any of it expecting something in return. He had just acted on instinct, on empathy. But now, standing before him was a woman from a different world, a different species, offering him something he had never even dreamed of. He swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. Mira, I don't know if I can accept that. I don't even know if it's possible. I mean, we're so different. Mira's gaze met his again, and this time there was a quiet determination in her eyes. It is possible, she said softly. My people, we have knowledge of genetics, of biology, our bodies we can adapt. We can create new life, even with those who are different. Michael stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. The idea seemed so surreal, so impossible, and yet he believed her. He had seen enough on this strange planet to know that the universe was far more mysterious and vast than he had ever imagined. If anyone could make such a thing possible, it was Mira and her people. But it wasn't just about biology. There were so many other questions, other concerns. What kind of life could they give this child? How would the child fit into either of their worlds? What would it mean for both of them? Mira, he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. Her skin was warm under his touch, and he felt a spark of something deeper pass between them. This is huge. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with understanding. I know, she whispered. I know it is much to ask, but I want you to know. I choose this. I choose you. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. I choose you. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together, the bond they had formed, the connection that had grown between them despite the vast differences in their species and their cultures. Michael felt something inside him shift, something that had been building for weeks but had finally reached its breaking point. He had felt it in the way he looked at her, in the way his heart ached when she was near. He had tried to ignore it, to push it away, telling himself that it was impossible, that they were too different. But now, as he sat here holding her hand, looking into her eyes, he realized the truth. He loved her. It wasn't the kind of love he had ever expected. It wasn't the kind of love he had ever known. But it was real, and it was deep, and it was undeniable. Mira, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. I think I love you. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of surprise. But then, her lips curved into a soft, beautiful smile, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. I love you too, Michael, she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry. If you're sure, then I want that too, he said quietly, his voice filled with both uncertainty and anticipation. I want to share this with you. Mira's eyes softened, and for a moment, they simply sat there, staring at each other in the glow of the fire, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. Then, slowly, Mira stood, her movements graceful and deliberate. She held out her hand to Michael, and without hesitation, he took it. They walked together, away from the fire, deeper into the cave where the soft light from the glowing plants illuminated their path. The air was cooler here, the distant sounds of the alien night creating a soothing backdrop to the moment that was about to unfold. When they reached the back of the cave, Mira turned to face him, her expression filled with both curiosity and tenderness. Show me, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Teach me. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer, his hands gently cupping her face. For a moment he hesitated, wanting to make sure she was completely comfortable. But when Mira leaned into his touch, her lips parting slightly, he knew she was ready. They kissed softly, their lips meeting in a delicate dance of exploration and connection. It was slow at first, tentative, but as the moments passed, the kiss deepened, their shared emotions flowing between them. Michael could feel Mira's body pressing against his, her warmth, her softness, her undeniable presence. Her hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. There was something almost sacred about the way they moved together, as if the universe itself had conspired to bring them to this moment. The boundaries between human and alien, between their two worlds, seemed to blur and fade, leaving only the raw, unfiltered connection between two souls. Their movements were slow, deliberate. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet, reverent unfolding of something new and beautiful. Mira's skin, glowing faintly in the dim light, was smooth and warm under Michael's touch, her iridescent sheen shimmering like the surface of water in the moonlight. She was otherworldly, yet in this moment she felt as real and tangible as anything he had ever known. Their bodies came together, soft gasps and whispers filling the air as they explored each other. Michael was careful, attentive, making sure Mira was comfortable every step of the way. Her reactions, her curiosity, only deepened his desire to make this experience as meaningful for her as it was for him. At one point, Mira pulled back slightly, her eyes wide with wonder as she looked down at their intertwined bodies. "This is beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You are beautiful." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "So are you, Mira?" "Myra?" The physical connection they shared felt different from anything Michael had ever experienced. It wasn't just about pleasure or desire, it was about discovery, about understanding each other on a level that went beyond words. It was as if they were rewriting the rules of intimacy, finding new ways to connect, new ways to express the love that had grown between them. As their bodies moved together in a rhythm that felt both ancient and new, Michael felt a deep, almost spiritual connection to Mira, as if they were merging not just physically, but on a level that transcended the physical realm. It was as though their very souls were intertwined, dancing together in the light of the stars. Time seemed to stretch and warp, the moments blending into one another in a haze of sensation and emotion. Michael's breath was shallow, his heart racing as they reached the crescendo of their shared experience. Mira's soft gasps filled the air, her body trembling beneath his touch, and in that moment, Michael knew that something had changed, something profound and irreversible. When it was over, they lay together in the soft glow of the cave, their bodies entwined, their breathing slow and steady. Michael held Mira close, his hand gently stroking her hair as she rested her head on his chest. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. They had said everything that needed to be said without speaking, had communicated through touch and breath and heartbeat. After what felt like an eternity, Mira lifted her head and looked at him, her dark eyes filled with warmth and wonder. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and sincere. Michael smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "No," he said gently, "thank you." Mira smiled back, her expression filled with quiet contentment. Now she whispered, resting her hand over his heart, "I understand you, Michael, in a way I never thought possible." Michael's heart swelled with emotion, his throat tightening as he looked into her eyes. "And I understand you too, Myra," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion, in a way that I never imagined. They lay together in the quiet of the cave, their bodies warm and close, the soft glow of the bioluminescent plants casting a gentle light over them. Outside, the alien world continued its quiet song, the stars twinkling in the sky, and the universe vast and stereo. In the days that followed, Mira began to explain more about her people's customs, about the sacred gift of life that she wanted to give him. She told him about Siloran biology, about how their bodies were capable of adapting to create new life with those from other species. She explained the deep spiritual significance of the gesture, how it was a bond that would tie them together forever, not just as lovers, but as partners, as parents. Michael listened to everything she said, his heart heavy with the magnitude of it all. He still wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew one thing for certain: he wanted to be with her. He wanted to see where this path would lead them. And so one night, as they sat together under the stars, he took her hand and looked into her eyes. "Let's do it," he whispered, his voice filled with both fear and hope. "Let's create this life together." Mira's eyes filled with tears, and she smiled, a smile so radiant it took his breath away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for accepting my gift." And in that moment, as they held each other under the alien sky, Michael realized that their journey had only just begun. From that night on, their bond deepened in ways Michael hadn't thought possible. The planet no longer felt like a place of survival, it felt like the beginning of something new, something beautiful. Mira's body began to change soon after, subtle at first but unmistakable. She was carrying their child, the physical embodiment of their connection, their love. It was a strange and wondrous thing to witness, and Michael found himself filled with both awe and trepidation. The pregnancy progressed differently than what he might have expected for a human. Mira's body seemed to glow, her skin taking on an even more radiant sheen, her movements graceful despite the changes happening within her. She was strong, resilient, and yet there were moments of vulnerability, moments when Michael would catch her staring off into the distance, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen, as if lost in thought. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mira placed her hand over Michael's and guided it to her growing belly. "Feel," she whispered. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he felt the faintest flutter beneath his palm, the undeniable movement of their child. It was real. It was happening. And in that moment, all of his doubts, all of his fears seemed to melt away, replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of wonder. Their days became a blur of anticipation and quiet moments of connection. Michael found himself more in tune with the planet, more at peace with the strangeness of their situation. He and Mira were building something together, something no one could have imagined. And though there were still challenges ahead, they faced them together. The child growing within Mira wasn't just a symbol of their love. It was a bridge between two worlds, two species, a living testament to the bond they had formed. And as the days passed, Michael found himself looking forward to the future not just for himself and Mira, but for the child they would soon bring into the universe. A child born from love, from sacrifice, and from the sacred gift that had bound them together forever. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, Michael felt a sense of hope, a hope that transcended the stars, the planet, and everything he had known before. And it all began with the gift Mira had chosen to give him, the gift of life. The days after Michael had agreed to accept Myra's sacred gift had passed in a strange blend of anticipation, awe, and a deepening sense of connection. The planet's twin suns continued their rhythmic dance across the sky, casting long shadows in the alien twilight, but for Michael, time had taken on a new quality. It stretched and contracted, each moment with Mira filled with both discovery and waiting. The changes in Mira's body were becoming more pronounced with each passing day. Her once slim figure had grown fuller, her belly now visibly rounded, a testament to the new life she carried within. But unlike human pregnancies, Mira's transformation was marked by something more ethereal. Her skin, already luminous, had taken on a faint, pulsing glow that intensified when the child moved inside her. Her eyes shone brighter, as if the very energy of the planet and the universe itself was coursing through her. Michael found himself both fascinated and overwhelmed. This wasn't like anything he had ever imagined, not even in his wildest dreams. He had always thought of parenthood in human terms, diapers, sleepless nights, first steps. But this was something far more profound, far more extraordinary. He was witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a union of two species, two worlds. Mira seemed at peace with the changes, though there were moments when Michael could see the weight of what was happening pressing on her. At night, when they lay beneath the stars, she would often place her hand on her stomach, her expression distant, contemplative. Michael would lie beside her, his hand resting over hers, feeling the faint movements of the child they had created together. "You feel her," Mira whispered one night, her voice soft and filled with wonder. Michael nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "I do. It's incredible." Mira smiled, turning her head to look at him, her dark eyes glowing faintly in the starlight. "She is strong, like you." Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't know about that. I think she gets her strength from you." Mira's smile widened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Michael couldn't quite understand. He had seen it before, in quiet moments when she thought he wasn't watching. It was as if something weighed heavily on her, something she hadn't yet told him. "What is it, Mira?" he asked gently, reaching out to brush a strand of her hair away from her face. "You've been distant lately. Is something wrong?" For a moment she didn't respond. Her eyes flickered away, her fingers tightening slightly over his. Then she sighed, a deep, weary sound, and turned back to him. "I fear." For her, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "For what she will be. For what the universe will expect of her." Michael's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Mira's gaze drifted back to the stars. "She is the first of her kind. A child born from two worlds, two species. She will carry the weight of both. I fear what that will mean for her, for us." Michael's heart tightened in his chest. He had thought about this too, late at night when sleep refused to come. Their child, Leora, as they had decided to name her, would be something entirely new. A bridge between two civilizations, two ways of life. But with that uniqueness came uncertainty. What kind of life could they give her? What kind of world would she be born into? "We'll figure it out," Michael said softly, squeezing her hand. "We'll make it work. We have to." Mira's eyes filled with unshed tears, but she nodded, her lips trembling as she tried to smile. "I know, I worry." Michael leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You're not alone in this. We'll do it together. All three of us." Mira closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I trust you, Michael. I trust us." And with those words, the tension seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet resolve. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: they were in this together. The birth happened sooner than either of them had expected. It began in the middle of the night, when the air was still and the planet's twin moons bathed the landscape in a pale, silvery light. Michael had been sleeping lightly, as he had taken to doing ever since Mira's pregnancy had advanced, always half alert in case she needed him. When he felt her hand on his shoulder, gentle but urgent, he was immediately awake. "Michael," she whispered, her voice tight with pain. "It's time." His heart leaped into his throat. He scrambled to his feet, his hands trembling slightly as he helped Mira sit up. She was breathing heavily, her face pale but determined, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tight with both fear and excitement. Mira nodded, wincing as another contraction rippled through her. "Yes, she is coming." Michael's mind raced. They were far from any kind of medical help, far from the technology of Mira's world or the familiarity of his own. He had no idea what to expect. Would the birth be like a human birth, or would it be something entirely different? But there was no time to dwell on it. Mira needed him. He helped her lie back on the makeshift bedding they had created in the cave, his heart pounding in his chest. The fire flickered nearby, casting long shadows on the walls, while outside, the alien night remained eerily quiet, as if the entire planet was holding its breath in anticipation. Mira gripped his hand tightly, her eyes squeezed shut as another wave of pain coursed through her. Her skin was glowing more brightly now, her entire body radiating with an almost supernatural light. Michael had never seen anything like it. She looked ethereal, otherworldly, a goddess of life and creation. Breathe, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm right here, Mira. I'm not going anywhere. Myra nodded, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she fought through the pain. Her body was strong, but even she was struggling. Michael could see the strain in her face, the way her muscles tensed with each contraction. But through it all, she never let go of his hand. Time seemed to blur. Michael lost track of how long it had been, how many hours had passed. All he knew was that Mira was fighting, that their child was coming, and that he had never felt more helpless in his life. And then, finally, it happened. Mira let out a low, guttural cry, her entire body tensing as one final, powerful contraction tore through her. And then, in an instant, the tension broke, replaced by a profound stillness. Michael's heart raced as he leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. And then, in the dim light of the cave, he saw her, their daughter. Leora. She was small, delicate, but unmistakably alive. Her skin was a soft, pale green like Mira's, but with a faint golden hue that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Her eyes were closed, her tiny chest rising and falling with her first breaths, and her hair dark, silken, and faintly glowing clung to her scalp in soft waves. Michael stared in awe, his entire body trembling with emotion. She was perfect. A miracle. A child born from two worlds, two species, the union of the impossible. Mira let out a shaky breath, her body sagging with exhaustion, but there was a radiant smile on her face as she looked at their daughter. She is beautiful, she whispered, her voice filled with both wonder and relief. Michael nodded, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. He reached out, gently cradling Lyra in his arms, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it took his breath away. This tiny, fragile being, she was theirs. She was the embodiment of everything they had fought for, everything they had hoped for. Hi, Lyra, Michael whispered, his voice trembling as he gazed down at his daughter. Welcome to the world. Mira watched him with tear-filled eyes, her expression soft and full of love. She is strong, she whispered. She will do great things. Michael nodded, his chest tight with emotion. He knew Mira was right. Leora was more than just a child. She was a symbol, a beacon of hope for both their species, for the universe itself. Her existence proved that love, understanding, and unity could transcend the boundaries of species, culture, and worlds. The following days were a blur of recovery and awe. Mira, though exhausted from the birth, healed quickly, her body regaining its strength in ways that astounded Michael. She was resilient, powerful, and yet so gentle with her daughter. Every time she looked at Leora, there was a quiet reverence in her eyes, a deep, unspoken bond between mother and child that transcended words. Michael, too, found himself transformed by the experience, holding Leora in his arms, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath, feeling her soft skin against his. He had never felt anything like it. It was as if the entire universe had narrowed down to this one moment, to this one tiny being who held so much promise, so much potential. As Leora grew stronger, Michael and Mira found themselves talking more and more about the future. What kind of life could they give her? How would she fit into the larger universe? A child born from two worlds? She will be a bridge, Mira said one evening as they sat by the fire, Leora sleeping peacefully in her arms. She will bring our people together, help them understand that we are not so different. Michael nodded, his heart swelling with pride and hope. I believe that, he said softly. She's special, Mira. She's going to change everything. Mira smiled, her eyes glowing softly in the firelight. Yes, she whispered. She will. It was just after dawn when the signal came. Michael had been outside the cave, gathering wood for the fire, when the familiar sound of a transmission reached his ears. His heart leaped in his chest as he raced back to the cave, his pulse pounding in his ears. Mira, he called out, his voice breathless with excitement. It's a signal. Someone's coming. Mira looked up from where she was cradling Leora, her eyes widening in surprise. The signal, she repeated, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Michael nodded, his chest tight with anticipation. Yes, it's a rescue ship. From your people. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, a smile spread across Mira's face as she nodded. It is time, she said softly. They have come for us. The Shaloran rescue ship arrived just as the twin suns were rising over the horizon, casting a golden light across the landscape. The ship was sleek, metallic, and unlike anything Michael had ever seen, a testament to the advanced technology of Mira's people. As the ship touched down, the hatch opened, and a group of Siloran diplomats emerged, their green skin and glowing eyes similar to Mira's. They approached cautiously, their gazes filled with curiosity and wonder as they took in the sight of Mira and Michael and the tiny child in Myra's arms. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one of the diplomats, an older Siloran with silver hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward. He looked at Mira, his expression softened. You have returned, he said softly, his voice filled with both relief and awe. Mira nodded, her gaze steady. Yes, and I bring with me a new beginning. The diplomat's eyes flicked to Leora, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled a small, gentle smile that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 possibilities. This child, he said softly, she is extraordinary. Mira nodded, her eyes shining with pride. She is the future, she whispered. Michael stood beside them, his heart swelling with emotion as he looked at its healer and diplomat, Mira, and finally at Leora, who was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. This was the beginning of something new, something extraordinary. As the Saloran ship prepared to depart, Michael found himself standing at the edge of the landing site, watching the planet they had called home for so long disappear behind the rising suns. Mira stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm, while Leora slept soundly in her embrace. The future was uncertain. They didn't know what awaited them in the vast expanse of space, what challenges they would face as they navigated the complexities of their two worlds. But for the first time in his life, Michael felt a sense of peace, of hope. They had each other. They had Leora, and together, they would face whatever the universe had in store. As the ship rose into the sky, leaving the alien world behind, Michael took one last look at the planet, the place where everything had begun. And then, with Mira by his side and Leora in his arms, he turned toward the stars. The universe was vast, filled with mysteries and wonders beyond imagination. But in that moment, as they soared into the unknown, Michael knew one thing for certain. Love true, deep, and powerful was the greatest force in the universe. It could bridge the gap between worlds, between species, between everything that seemed to divide them. And in Leora, that love would shine brighter than the stars.
eerbetoon voor een brandstiller op tv. Vanavond zijn er perioden met regen en over de nacht volgt in het midden en later ook in het noorden natte sneeuw. Morgen valt in het noorden sneeuw, elders valt regen bij 2 tot 5 graden. En dat was het nieuws op 5 dankjewel. grond.